The Arcane fandom has a lot of issues, but the most prominent one, in my personal opinion, is misogynoir. We cannot go one day without the fandom treating the black female lead of this show, Mel Medarda, in a weird and strange way. It's just been this weird trend of people writing weird human experimentation fan fictions about her, and I let it slide the first time it happened because I didn't think that people realized the dark history of experimenting on black women in this country. But the fact that it has happened twice now, I was like, yeah, we're gonna need a video about this. So in today's video, I'm gonna be talking about Arcane's weird relationship with Mel Medarda, as well as talking about the history of experimenting on black women in the US. So if you're interested in that, keep on watching. As somebody who is obsessed with fandom culture, our society's values, biases, and blind spots are directly expressed in a lot of the issues that we have in fandom culture. And we can obviously see this in the Arcane fandom. Arcane, as you guys know, if you had watched I don't even know what the video is titled, but I put in the iCards for you, is a show based off League of Legends, a very popular video game. Arcane, the TV show, has been praised for its stunning visuals, powerful characters, as well as the powerful storytelling, specifically in season 1. And despite this show being so great, the fandom, on the other hand, has some serious problems. But despite how amazing this TV show is, the Arcane fandom has honestly been so weird as it relates to our black titular female character, Mel Medarda. And despite how amazing this TV show is, a lot of the fandom, they move, I don't know what to say, they're just weird. There has been this weird trend where they keep trying to make fan fictions of Mel Medarda, our titular black female lead, in these weird positions where she gets experimented on by another one of our main leads, Victor. And I just find this trend to be so weird because yes, I understand that fanfiction is a mode of expression, but the fact that they keep choosing Mel of all people to be the victim of Victor has some weird social and historical context that I want to further talk about. Because yes, we all use fanfiction to escape, but the fact that people are using fanfiction to fantasize about black women being exploited in that way has some historical history behind that. Because in the show, Mel Medarda, for those who obviously haven't watched Arcane, because this is like a history video as well as talking about what the hell is going on in the US, Mel Medarda is one of the black female characters. And the fact that they choose Mel to specifically do this to has a lot of historical pretext, right? Because unlike a lot of shows where there are black female characters, Arcane made a very decisive choice to let Mel be intellectual, powerful, come from a very strong war family and choosing a whole different path, right? I talked about this phenomenon more in my other Mel video, but the fact that many Arcane fans saw this powerful, strong black woman and decided, hey, I'm gonna make her a victim, there's history behind this. Because not only do some people want to make Mel a victim because they have this weird antagonism towards black women, a lot of people, I talked about this more extensively in my other Mel video, they want to turn her into this vivacious sex demon succubus, which is reminiscent of the Jezebel stereotype that for some reason keeps being put on black women, right? In order to completely mischaracterize Mel. But I want to talk about the history of experimenting on black women in the US. So if you aren't from the US, maybe you don't know this, but our country is based on slavery and is based off the suffering of black bodies. But before I can really talk about the long history of black exploitation in this country, I need to talk about gynecology. As a woman, finding out that the whole concept of gynecology was made by exploiting black women and their work and their bodies, I was sick. I was sick. Like, as a woman, but specifically a black woman, finding out that every time I get a gynecological checkup is rooted in the exploitation of women who look like me is harrowing. What is this place? I don't know. Let's check it out though. Shush. Everybody shush. Everybody shush. It seems as if somebody new has just stumbled upon our pastoral court. Hi there, stranger. My name is Ella Pastoral, and all of the lovely people that you see before you are a part of my esteemed court. From my squires who have early access to my videos, to my nobles who have special behind-the-scenes access, to my dukes and duchesses who are able to pick out topics for my videos, to my own special royal advisors who mean so much to me. All of these people make up the Ella Pastoral court. If you want to be like these lovely people and be a part of my esteemed court, go to Ella Pastoral on Patreon. But it seems as if you need to be on your way, traveler. Let's head back to the regularly scheduled content. And as a nurse, it's harrowing too, because not only is there misogyny in the mix, There's racism in the mix. It just sucks. But let's talk about the father of gynecology. The supposed father of gynecology was a man called Dr. J. Marion Sims. And the reason why he was coined the father of gynecology is that he did a lot of brutal experimentation on black women to see exactly what was happening with their reproductive systems in order to fuel the whole system of slavery in the United States. I forgot which year it was that Congress decided to no longer import high-key still Africans from West Africa in order to bring them here to be slaves, but in order to fuel the never-ending capitalist desires of America, a lot of doctors and slave owners, I have to remind you, a lot of these doctors were slave owners as well. They had to figure out how to increase the number of slaves on their plantation, which would then ensure their further prosperity. Come in, Mr. J. Marion Sims. He did so many experiments on these poor innocent women with no pain relief, because at this time they believed that black people were subhuman. A lot of racists still believe this pseudoscience nonsense, but at that time these racists had the power, money, and the right to experiment on these black bodies. They were literal property. These women literally had no autonomy over their bodies. They were literally seen as property, but their suffering sadly became a foundation of American healthcare. Deirdre Cooper Owens. When the Constitution banned the international African slave trade, there became an issue with how the U.S. was going to maintain and grow this very lucrative system of slavery. The solution was to concentrate on natural increases, which simply meant making sure that enslaved women had children who lived past the age of 1, because slavery was a condition that was passed to the child from the mother. What this did was lay at the feet of black women an added responsibility to have more children. In addition, because modern gynecology advanced quite rapidly in the South, these doctors, many of whom were slave owners themselves, had access to black bodies, particularly black women's bodies, to experiment on, to examine, and to, in their words, cure or fix diseases and disorders. I coined the term medical superbodies because black women stood at the crossroads of being a universal norm for healing, because clearly these doctors could use these women to cure any women, and yet their bodies still held these racialized fictions. For instance, that black women are more hypersexual or lascivious, black women don't experience pain, black women are immodest. All of those things tie into this belief that somehow black women were intellectually inferior to black women, but also physically stronger, without any linkages being made to the fact that most black women were agricultural slaves. The next time you're at your pap smear, think about these poor women who probably were giving these rusted, unsterilized tools in order to check their reproductive system. It's actually a sickening thing to know all this stuff. And sadly, the legacy of exploiting black women for the healthcare system, it sadly didn't end after the founding fathers died. It continued all the way into the 20th century with someone who I want to introduce you to called Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks is somebody who comes from my home state of Maryland. She was somebody who I even learned about in my nursing school. But if you didn't go to nursing school or medical school, actually, for those who went to medical school, let me know if you guys learned about Henrietta Lacks, because we had to fight for her story to be known. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Henrietta Lacks is another black woman whose body was exploited by the U.S. healthcare system, and to this day isn't known for all of the work that her body contributed to the United States healthcare system. I am going to read from my script here because I don't want to get things wrong, because her story was something that her family for several generations after she died had to fight to get told, and I want to do it the justice that it deserves. So Henrietta Lacks was a woman that had cancer, and while she was getting treated at Johns Hopkins, mind you, they still had segregation. They took the cancer cells from her cervix, and these cells eventually became HeLa cells. If you are not a bio major, science major, healthcare major, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but these HeLa cells were revolutionary in what they did for medical science as we know it. Eventually, these HeLa cells were used in order to contribute to the polio vaccine, cancer research, gene mapping, and IVF. If you guys are from Maryland, then you already know how messed up Johns Hopkins as an institution is. I literally think this year, 2025, they somehow managed to pollute the Chesapeake Bay. I'm gonna see if I can find the article for you, but Johns Hopkins is mad shady, and they were also shady back then when segregation was alive and thriving. So they took this lady's cells for cancer research, and because of the fact they took her cells without letting her know, right? So much scientific innovation happened. Like guys, like her cells contributing to polio research is something that she should have a statue for. But don't forget IVF, gene mapping. All this stuff is major in terms of contributing to our healthcare system. But for years she never got the appreciation that was warranted for her contributions to science. Just like the women all the way back then when they were creating the concept of gynecology. It's a mess. Because when I was reading the book on how she was continually exploited, because she died, guys, she died of the cancer. She died of cervical cancer, right? They didn't even get her name right. I think they called her name like Helen Lax instead of Henrietta. Like, even in deaf black women cannot get the due respect that is warranted to them. Let me see if I can find the name that they was calling her, because I remember it definitely wasn't Henrietta, which was her name. So her descendants have been fighting to have her contributions acknowledged, and I think they did. I'm gonna see if I can find the research article, but the fact that it took several generations after her is wild to me. And if you think the history of experimenting and exploiting black women's bodies ended with Henrietta Lacks, you are wrong. There has been a recent case that has been disturbing me for months, and I just need to talk about it because as a nurse and as somebody who is obsessed with all this random healthcare stuff, her story has been brutal. So in Georgia, there has been a very disturbing case that I've been wanting to talk about that further exemplifies why I'm so sick and tired of the Arcane fandom writing these weird human experimentation stories about Mel Medarda. So there was a woman, her name was Adriana Smith, and she came into the hospital having stroke-like symptoms and was eventually declared brain dead. The issue, however, was that she was pregnant, and typically when you are declared brain dead, unless you are an organ donor, they unplug everything and let you go peacefully, right? They let the body do what it needs to do in order to let you pass on. But what complicated this specific case is that she was pregnant, and because of Georgia's fetal heartbeats law, she was kept alive in order to incubate the fetus that was inside her. And not only is this an ethical issue, it is a specific racial issue, because for the entire history of America, we have used black women as, I hate to say this, like breeding stock, and it's actually very, 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 very scary. There has been a recent update on this whole case that I'll talk about later in this video, but at the time I was originally scripting the script, her family was fighting in order to not let their daughter be in this vegetative state and in order to let her pass on peacefully. And I have to remind you, this is going against their wishes. This was going against Adriana's wishes, right? But despite this being against everybody who matters decision, the hospital is going to send the bill to Adriana's family. And I just have to say, this is a mess, because while her son has been visiting her, he's confused, like, why is mommy like this? And this was postponing her death practically, and it was postponing the family's grieving process. How can you really let your family member go when you know for a fact that they are still in the hospital being kept forcefully alive? I hated every day of this, keeping up with the family's updates, trying to figure out what they're gonna do, because guys, medical bills in the United States are out of this world, and I just can't imagine being a family member in this situation, knowing that not only do I not want this for my loved one, but I am going to be forced to pay this bill, knowing that they are doing this nonsense without my consent. And the fact that Adriana's body was forcefully kept functioning after her death in order for her fetus to be kept alive is eerily reminiscent of how black women have been used systemically in this country in order to propagate slavery and propagate capitalist exploitation. Is actually so disheartening.
I'm seeing a number of white women using The Handmaid's Tale to talk about Adriana Smith, and I think it's important to understand we shouldn't be doing that, because there is enough real history that you could be using to talk about what was done to her. For example, a lot of people are talking about Henrietta Lacks, and I kind of want to add to that conversation because Henrietta was not the only person in her family to be used by science. And I learned the details of it from Antonia Hilton's book Madness, which is a book about Crownsville State Hospital, which was actually originally known as Maryland's Hospital for the Negro Insane. It was an asylum that was built in 1911. Actually, the first 12 patients of the hospital were the 12 people who built it. And I'm just going to read directly from the book. Lucille Elsie Pleasant, known as Elsie Lax, delivered herself in 1940. Her mother, Henrietta Lax, went into labor in the former slave home house where generations of family had been born. As her father, Day, rushed to summon the midwife, Elsie could not wait another second to see the world. As author Rebecca Skloot told it in The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lax, Henrietta's newborn shot out and hit her fragile skull on the floor. Everyone in the family agreed that Elsie was beautiful and looked so much like her mom. But Elsie would always be different from her family and most people in their community. She didn't speak and couldn't hear. She communicated through murmurs and chirps. When not running through the grass and playing with farm animals, Elsie often sat in silence. Skloot discovered Elsie's story. She embarked on a decade-long retracing of Henrietta Lax's life with Deborah, Henrietta's daughter, and Elsie's younger sister. Her work uncovered the unbelievable story behind the tissue that doctors at Johns Hopkins extracted from Elsie's mother and used without her consent to develop an immortal and seemingly invaluable human cell line known as HeLa. But as her mother's cells were transformed into billion-dollar drugs and vaccines, Elsie was at Crownsville. The evidence suggests she was used by science too. Elsie was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and idiocy. As she grew older, she grew more curious and boisterous. According to Skloot, everyone assumed it was her birth that had kept her mind like an infant's. After a few clumsy accidents that left Elsie's skin bruised and burned, it was clear she needed constant supervision, or healing. Henrietta and Day would drive Elsie to see preachers in tents, and these men would try to perform their miracles. None of them worked. As Elsie's condition only worsened, Henrietta and Day struggled to manage. Before, Henrietta would soothe her daughter by combing her curls or rocking her. But now, Elsie was having more frequent outbursts. Doctors told Henrietta and Day that sending Elsie away to a hospital was best for everyone. Crownsville was a long way away from the Lax family, and the hospital wasn't the easiest to access by public transport. Nevertheless, for the first year or two that Elsie was there, Henrietta visited her every week. She boarded the train from Baltimore and waited patiently in the hospital's visitation room to see her daughter. When Elsie arrived, she and Henrietta would snuggle. They'd fall into their old routines, combing and playing with one another's hair. Elsie was 10 years old when she arrived at Crownsville. She was only 15 when she died there alone. Henrietta visited Elsie religiously for a couple of years, even with a handful of young children at home and doctor's appointments and treatments that she wished to keep secret. For some time, Henrietta had been suffering through severe abdominal pain and vaginal bleeding. She felt like there was a knot in her stomach that wouldn't go away. Henrietta underwent a series of procedures and treatments for what was determined to be cervical cancer. During a biopsy, her cells were harvested for testing. Those cells would go on to save an unimaginable number of lives, but they wouldn't save hers. Her visits to Elsie came to an end as the cancer metastasized throughout her body. Henrietta died in October 1951 at the age of 31. According to Rebecca Skloot, the last time Henrietta saw Elsie, she was seated outside one of the patient courtyards behind a barbed wire fence. Henrietta peered through the wiring and made eye contact with her daughter. Elsie jumped and ran to her mom. For a moment, she stood there staring. "She looked like she'd doing better," Henrietta said to a family friend, almost as though she was trying to convince herself it would be okay, as though she knew it was the last day she'd have with her child. Yeah, Elsie looked nice and clean and everything. When her mother was laid to rest, people came for days to see her body in the old home house. Nobody, it seemed, thought to bring Elsie. Years went by before Elsie's younger sister Deborah learned the truth. When she found out what doctors had done to her mother and how taxing it was to get institutions like Johns Hopkins to tell her the truth, she began to worry about what might have been done to Elsie. Deborah called Crownsville's administration to demand access to her sister's records. They claimed that almost every document before 1955 had been destroyed. Conveniently, that was the year Elsie died at the asylum. It didn't sit right with Deborah's spirit. She broke out in hives and struggled to catch her breath. When she checked in to see her doctor, he told her she had almost had a stroke. Rebecca Skloot and Deborah Lax made a trip to Crownsville. Deborah tucked an old photo of Elsie into her purse before the long drive, along with Elsie's birth certificate and proof of power of attorney. The two women came across Paul Lurs. Paul was then serving as Crownsville's Director of Performance and Improvement. Already, he had a reputation as an unofficial historian who had access to decades of records. As he pulled out files, he warned them, sometimes learning can be just as painful as not knowing. Paul disappeared into a closet. When he emerged, he was carrying a series of old autopsy reports, blanketed with stains and dust. Paul and Deborah quickly found the report bearing Elsie's name. In her file was a photograph. I am going to put a trigger warning on this next part. In it, Elsie's wide chestnut eyes, which once rested beautifully beneath her curls, were nearly swollen shut and bulging from her head. The curls that Henrietta had so adored were matted and frizzy. Her lips were dry, dark, and twice their former size. Two large, white, manicured hands gripped Elsie's once beautiful neck, twisting her gaze to the left and holding her in place. It appeared Deborah's sister was screaming. Records from 1955, the year that Elsie died, indicate that doctors at Crownsville performed 2 studies on people with epilepsy that year. One, titled Use of Deep Temporal Leads in the Study of Psychomotor Epilepsy, suggested that doctors had tested new or more aggressive forms of shock to patients' brains. Another from that same year was titled Pneumoencephalographic and Skull and X-ray Studies in 100 Epileptics. There were only about 100 people with epilepsy at the hospital at the time, meaning there was almost no doubt Elsie, who had no ability to communicate or to consent, had been forced to take part. This was an unusually brutal treatment, one that none of the employees of color that I've spoken to had experienced or seen. Pneumoencephalography required doctors to drill into a patient's skull to drain out the fluid that surrounds each and every one of our brains. Air or helium would be pumped into the skull, allowing physicians to produce sharp x-rays of a person's brain. The process was as painful as it sounds and had the potential to permanently disfigure. It could take months for a person to restore their brain fluid to normal levels. In the meantime, they would suffer headaches, seizures, and fits of vomiting. I was able to obtain Elsie's death certificate, but never her autopsy report. People who have seen it say the records indicate that in the last 6 months of her life, Elsie forcibly vomited almost daily, frequently coughing up dark brown clotted blood. Deborah Lax had every right to be outraged. Discussions of informed consent may not have been as rigorously regulated as they are today, but they have been part of the medical field since the turn of the 20th century. Crownsville had a duty to its patients and to their families. Winter Road may have been long gone by the time Elsie died, but his legacy was lingering. The imagery of a white staffer gripping Elsie's neck and forcing her into submission mirrored many of the hospital's earliest photographs. In an attempt to appear professional and capable of advanced study, Crownsville staff had actually entrenched old habits under a clinical cover. That day in Paul's office, he, Deborah, and Rebecca stood together, often in silent shock. Deborah pulled out the old, beautiful photo she had brought with her. She placed it next to the other, almost unrecognizable version of her big sister. Paul and Rebecca watched as Deborah traced her fingers along Elsie's bruised face. She whispered, "She looks like she needs her sister." Because when we talk about what was done to Adriana Smith, it's important to bring the historical context to it as well. Because what was done to her was outrageous, it was unforgivable, it is unacceptable. It is also not the first time something like this has happened. At a time when we're talking about rights being taken from people, autonomy being stripped from them, it is important to remember that the most marginalized amongst us have been on the front lines of that fight for a very long time. They have been experiencing it for a very long time. And that while it is incredibly important to talk about this, to have this conversation, use real history when doing it. Please don't use graphics from a TV show. Like, it's just, please don't.
Because we keep talking about how much social change and how much social progress that we've made. But Trump has really highlighted how we are not as progressive as a nation as we claim to be.
Adriana Smith's case is a perfect example of the general public's opinions on capacity and who has the ability to birth and raise a child does not matter. Not because they don't inherently matter as part of our personhood, but because you all don't actually have that power. The government has that fucking power. Because if somebody who is dead, can be forced to carry a child, then what does your idea of capacity on who can have a child matter? All those arguments go out the fucking window, okay? This is not a miracle. This is not the joy of childbirth. This is the government deciding what they can do with your body, not what you can do with your body. And that has always been the issue that disabled people have been trying to highlight for a lot of you, but you all refuse to listen. Hell, if you're Black and disabled, you know better than anybody. When I was born, I was limp. I was a limp baby. And doctors proposed all of these interventions that my mom was really kind of hesitant about because they seemed very intense for a literal baby. She had to go back and forth with multiple doctors about delaying those procedures. And at times those doctors would hint at the thought that they thought what she was doing was child abuse. Because even as a baby, they wanted to get to decide what happened to my body. Because I don't know if you know this, but our society deems any medical intervention that betters the human race as inherently necessary, regardless of what that individual person wants. It happened with Henrietta Lacks. It's happened to Adriana Smith. It happens in countless of doctors' rooms across the country. And not just in this country, but because disablement is both foreign and domestic policy, there are people across the world that are being experimented on because they've been disabled by imperialism, and they are the test bodies. The best we all can do is uphold radical autonomy for people, whether they are alive or dead. Because thinking you have the capacity to determine what somebody can and cannot do with their body as somebody who's not in power, that's not a power you have.
And just like the women who were there at the founding of gynecology, Adriana's bodily autonomy was taken away from her. Her dignity was lost to a system that prioritizes a new potential life versus just her own life that had sadly already ended. This decision was sadly not made in a vacuum. This decision reflects the historical precedent of not caring about Black women's reproductive rights as well as reproductive labor. And I just want to talk about how this country specifically does not care about women's bodily autonomy. Most states have statutes that invalidate a women's advance directive if she is pregnant, a U.S. study finds. And because those statutes are often not clearly outlined in the DNR form, women filing out an advance directive most likely would not know that it wouldn't apply if they were pregnant, Weechers reported in JAMA. The situation may be rare, but it's not certainly unheard of for a young woman to end up incapacitated and tethered to life support machines because of a pregnancy statute. In 2014, 33-year-old Marlise Monzo suffered a pulmonary embolism and was pronounced brain dead upon arrival at the hospital. She was 14 weeks pregnant at the time. Although Monzo had told her husband and family that she wouldn't want to be kept alive by machines if she were fatally injured, doctors said they could not disconnect her from life support. The family was told that even if Monzo had a DNR, a Texas statute forbade them from taking a pregnant woman off life support. It took a lawsuit by her husband to get permission 2 months later to remove life support from Monzo. The researchers found that 28 states had statutes restricting a woman's choice to withhold or withdraw life-sustaining therapies because of pregnancy, and 68% of the official advance directive forms in those states did not disclose the pregnancy restrictions. Of the 28, 25 had statutes that invalidated a woman's DNR if she turned out to be pregnant, and 3 states, Alaska, Georgia, and Oklahoma, required the physicians test a woman for a pregnancy before withholding or removing life support. 2 states, Washington and Idaho, did not have a specific statute bearing the removal of life support from pregnant women, but did state in their DNR forms that it was not allowed. 8 states' advance directive documents ask for the women's pregnancy-specific care preferences, while 18 states banned withdrawal of life-sustaining therapy when the treating physician determined the fetus could survive if the mother was kept on life support. 12 require the woman be kept on life support regardless of the fetus's status. In 19 states, surrogate decisions were restricted because of pregnancy. And I sadly want to remind you that this article was written in 2019, before Roe v. Wade was overturned and our country said, fuck us, right? Fuck us. Anybody with a uterus. So I don't even want to imagine how many more states have changed the laws. So if I have a DNR DNI, which means under no circumstances do I want to be revived after I die, in order for my unborn fetus to fester in my body until the baby is viable enough. I don't know. It's not right. But I do have an update and I want to play it for you guys so you can be at least aware of whatever happened to Adriana Smith and the baby that she was practically incubating.
A new life is born here in Metro Atlanta as another life will soon come to an end. This past Friday, Adriana Smith, the pregnant mother being kept alive until her baby was born, delivered baby Chance ahead of her due date in August. Just hours ago, I sat down with her mother, April Newkirk, to learn how baby Chance is doing and how she and her family are coping.
He's fighting. He's in the NIC unit. He's about 1 pound, 13 ounces. And he's expected to be okay. He's just fighting. We just want prayers for him. Just keep praying for him. He's here now.
April Newkirk, a grandmother once again, with baby Chance entering the world in the early hours of Friday, June 13th, weighing less than 2 pounds. But with the joy of new life comes unimaginable pain for her and her family.
Today we had a family meeting with the hospital, and they are going to remove her at 2 p.m. tomorrow from life support. So it's kind of hard, it's kind of hard. it's hard to process.
Newkirk now preparing to say goodbye to her daughter, Adriana Smith, after celebrating her 31st birthday on Sunday. The young mother, who doctors say is brain dead, has been medically kept alive at Emory University Midtown Hospital since February so she could deliver her baby, a situation that sparked controversy across the country.
I think all women should have a choice about their body.
It all began in February when Smith went to Northside Hospital suffering from an intense headache. She was given medication and released. But the next day, things took a devastating turn, with a CT scan later showing multiple blood clots in her brain. She was later declared brain dead.
Oh, she would say that they failed her. She would definitely say that, Mommy, they failed me. If the shoe was on the other foot, I would have been there and I would have made recommendations. That's what she would have said.
Newkirk says Adriana, a nurse herself, knew something wasn't right and deserved the kind of care she would have given and did give to patients of her own.
She was passionate about being a nurse. Yeah, she was very passionate about it.
Now, as she braces for what's ahead, she's hoping for the same support that people from across the world have already given to her and her family.
I shouldn't be burying my daughter. My daughter should bury me. And she had a lot to give. So I'm just trying to hold it together right now.
Newkirk says she is grateful for all of the love and support her family has received, and she tells me they will share more about the family's plans for Adriana in the coming days.
And yeah, my thoughts and prayers are with the family. When that poor baby gets out of the NICU, I know that family is going to be financially struggling because of how much it costs to be in the hospital, let alone the ICU for Adriana and the NICU for her baby. But my thoughts and prayers are definitely with that family, because this was guys, I promise it was an experiment. The psychological damage that family is gonna have to deal with, as well as the financial damage. I hope they post that GoFundMe soon. Like, they're gonna need physically all the help they can get. But that is exactly why I was so mad when I saw that the Arcane fandom was writing all these weird experimentation fanfics about Mel Medarda, because not only has there been a dark, disturbing history of our country experimenting on Black women in order to prop up our capitalist regime practically, right? But the fact that Black women are still being experimented on, because I promise what they were doing to Adriana was an experiment. It wasn't right for them to do that, keeping her family from mourning their daughter and then putting all of the financial burden on them. Is not right. I don't have anything else to say. I hope the family posts the GoFundMe soon. I hope the Arcane fandom can finally learn to respect Black women and stop mischaracterizing Mel. Stop writing these experimentation fanfics, because until they stop treating Black women how they do in our society, I'ma always give them the side eye for trying to replicate the misogynoir in fanfic world. And yeah, I hope you guys like this video. I'm definitely gonna try to be posting more shorter videos now that I'm done with my wicked deep dive, and I'll definitely see you guys in the next one. Bye.